Well, starting my turbo project here. This is my 2002 Mazda Miata LS, 1.8 liter, 6-speed Torsen diff, 18,000 miles. Look how clean. This is going to be a joy to work on. So this is the first day of my turbo project. The first thing I'm doing is I'm going to be draining the fluids. I removed the front pan there, which is attached with 10 millimeter screws. So I'm going to tape the screws to the pan there, and I'm going to be cutting that later to fit the turbo, but for right now, just getting it out of the way. I wanted to mention these a couple different extensions. Reading through the instructions, this is for the Flyin Miata Voodoo kit. They talk about having some extensions, and I've got myself pretty organized here. So I've got 2 sets of metric sockets, my fluids, my screwdrivers, my pliers, vice grips, drill, hacksaw, more tools. I want to keep everything really organized here. I've sorted out all the parts. I checked in everything very carefully. So these are all the bags. They're all grouped together in sequence. I did get the clutch and flywheel kit, which is in those 2 boxes, the radiator hose on top. The rest of this is the sorted part of the Flyin Miata kit. I did have them do the pre-assembly on the turbo, so it saved me a little bit of work there. And back there is the intercooler. One other thing I wanted to mention is let there be light. I went the cheap route with those clip-on with the LED light bulbs. As you can see, it makes it like daylight under the hood. I also have these little battery-powered LEDs. Here we go. So I can put them wherever I need them. Comes in handy. Now that I have the cover removed, it creates easy access here from underneath. Look how clean. The radiator drain is right there. So I'm going to drain the fluids here and get that done. Next step is to remove the battery, to disconnect the battery. You can see I've disconnected the negative terminal here with the 10 millimeter nut. Next step is to remove the crossover tube, the air intake, and snorkel. Next, I've got to remove that little bracket where those 2 relays are. So I'm going to take those relays off and leave them hanging here because they'll be reinstalled later. Next step says to remove the hose that comes from the cam cover to the intake pipe. It describes it a little bit differently in the instructions, but I'm pretty sure this is the one. I can remove the clip as well because it won't be reused. The next step is to remove the cover for the exhaust manifold. The instructions say that those bolts are normally rusted on. I love this car. It's so clean. I did put some penetrating oil on it, but they came right off. Awesome. Next step is to remove the exhaust manifold. I just can't believe how clean this car is. I love it. I did spray those with penetrating oil. I'm going to let them soak for a while before I go pull them off. I think I'm going to go try to find a little bit of a shorter extension too. Don't you just love it in these how-to videos where the thing comes right apart, but you can't get it apart? Well, this O2 sensor is really hard to get off. So what I did was I took a crescent wrench, got a crescent wrench on there, and then I improvised. I took a little 1/4 inch socket and put it through the end of the open end wrench, the crescent wrench. And then I used a little persuasion and of course some penetrating oil. But that's how I got it loose. So, little trick there. The hardest part of this whole disassembly was actually getting the exhaust out of there. Once I got the exhaust manifold unbolted and everything in the exhaust system even unbolted from the catalytic converter, there just wasn't enough room to get it out of there. So I called Flyin Miata, and Eric was very helpful and gave me the hint to put a jack underneath the engine to tilt it up. That way I could get at the flange to get off the exhaust pipe, and was able to get it out. And this is what I'm talking about right there. I had to get this flange off the header to be able to get it all out. This exhaust piece I actually was able to get out from the bottom. This came out from the top very easily once I got it unbolted from the flange. The next step here is to cut a notch in the slip by the frame rail. This is 1 inch from the shock mount bracket. This is 3 1/4 inch, and you only cut about 1/2 inch because that's all there is to get to the actual frame rail. Now the next step is for me to get a hammer and beat this down. Now there are power steering hoses here. I was able to cut with very short strokes, and I put my hand underneath to keep the hacksaw from interfering with the power steering hoses. All right, frame rail lip is cut. One thing I wanted to let you know is I did use a pretty good size hammer, which actually worked pretty well because you don't have a lot of room to swing between there and the where the exhaust manifold will be hooking up. And I came up with a little trick here. I took an old 9/16 socket, put it in vice grips, and then used it when I got close to the end to try to get that flap down as much as possible. I don't know yet how critical that is, but I thought I would try to get it down as far as I can. Finished it off with a file, so it's nice and smooth. It almost looks factory. Hope that's down far enough. Looks pretty good though. We'll find out. Well, I don't know if you can see that or not. Let me see if I can get a little bit of light on there. Right there in the center of the light where I've got right next to the oil filter is where the oil sending unit is. So the next step is to remove that and then tap into that for the oil supply for the turbo. It took me a while to even find it. I'm going to try universal on a couple different things. They said to use a 15/16 socket. I might have to go out and buy a deep socket because I found a 24 millimeter, which is pretty close, but I don't know if it's going to work. We'll find out. All right, I got it out. So here's the deal. I'm learning very quickly. You've really got to be creative. A 15/16 or 24 millimeter even deep socket with the universal would have worked pretty well. I didn't have a deep socket, so I just used duct tape to tape it to my universal, and was pretty careful, but I was able to get it out. Awesome. There we go. I've got my first official part installed. That's the oil feed. So I've removed the oil sensor and replaced it with the T and put the hose on, and my first official part assembled. Woohoo! I had Flyin Miata do this assembly. It was 50 bucks. I figured why not save myself a little bit of time. 50 bucks didn't seem too unreasonable. So I do have the hard lines for the water and oil. So I actually skip a page and come back to that in a little bit. So this part I'm working on the turbo assembly. The first step is to put the studs in the outlet there, and then we'll go to the next step. Well, I was kind of looking ahead in the instructions and say I have to replace this hose. And I realized it would be I think it'll be a lot easier to do this before I put the turbo in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, but there's a little clamp there that I haven't been able to figure out how to get off, so I'm going to cut the hose off. And I don't know if I reuse that or not, but I just wanted to show you guys about the tip. It might be easier to replace that hose before you put the turbo in. Well, I decided to dry fit the turbo. So I had to jack up the engine a little bit on the driver's side to get it in. And I've got it in, and I don't know if you can see the chrome supply line or drain line there. But that was kind of tricky to get in. I actually had to use a 24-inch extension with the universal on it to get up in there. But I got it hand tight. But the thing I'm noticing is how tight it is in there. So I've got to somehow figure out, you can see the turbo outlet here, and the down pipe, not the down pipe, but the intercooler pipe has got to come down from here and somehow get around this. So I'm going to take a look at this and take the turbo back out and maybe try to get some better ideas on how everything's got to go. So that is the next step. Okay, with the turbo off, I've dry fitted the tube for the intercooler. So it's coming right up here against the power steering, but I think that's pretty close. It looks like it might be easier to get it on, at least rough positioned with the turbo out. Here's my oil drain line, and I had to push this power steering line back a little bit to make room for the hard line. Now, of course, I got to get the radiator return on. So I'm going to try to get all that dry fit here, so I know that it fits before I start putting the turbo on. Well, this is a big day. This is the day I drill into the oil pan. It was a good thing I dry fitted the hoses, but I had to disconnect the radiator hose and kind of slide it out of the way. At least I have it positioned where it needs to be, and I'll just pull it back down when I'm done. And I am using the hard lines, so I did also dry fit the hard line so I could locate my hole. Now the instructions say no more than 2 inches down from the lip, and that's about where I am with that mark. I've got a pretty good sized drill here, and I thought the big drill might actually be a problem, but it might actually work. So I can get the drill in there, just have to push it pretty straight, and I just need to push the hoses out of the way. So I'm going to follow the instructions, put grease on the drill. I'll put a tube or something over the top of the drill so it can't go in too far to the oil pan, because the oil pickup's right on the other side of that. So that's next step. Well, extremely scary part 1 is done. You can see I got the hole drilled in the oil pan, just a tad less than 2 inches from the upper lip. So now it's time to tap it. I was super careful, used a lot of grease. And what I ended up using, well, I'll show you here. Flyin Miata gives you the drill bit and the tap, of course, for this. What I ended up using was a 3/4 inch piece of PVC, and trimmed it so that only about 1/4 inch of the drill was extending. And actually I think that worked pretty well, because it was a bit bigger than the drill. So when I kicked the grease on there, the grease was kind of in between the drill and the tube. So there was a lot of grease in there to catch the shaving. So hopefully that minimizes anything that could have fallen into the oil pan. Now to move on to tapping. There you go. There's my hole drilled and tapped. Wasn't able to get the drill in perfectly straight, but it was pretty darn close, and I was able to get the tap in straight. The key is to have as many extensions as you can, because sometimes that's the difference between being able to get where you need to go and not, is having the right extensions. So it's drilled and tapped and cleaned out. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the fitting in there and move on. All right, I'm putting the EGR tube back on, or actually the new tube they sent me goes into the exhaust manifold. It's kind of hard to get at, so I cut off these hoses just at the very end so I can get them off easily. And they're short enough. I mean, there's enough left where I can get them on with no problem. So hopefully it'll allow me to get my hand in there as well. Done. I sealed it with the Right Stuff gasket sealer, and I'm ready for the next step. Well, I just finished flushing out the oil pan. I put the mineral spirits down there and poured a couple quarts of oil in there to clear it out, so I've got that done. I've also put mineral spirits in to clean out the intercooler, which is what Flyin Miata suggests. So that is blowing out and getting dried out now. Moving on to the water lines now. So I bought the hard water line kit, and now what I'm going to do is, this is the outboard water line. It connects to the turbo right about there. There's a fitting down there and a banjo nut that goes in there, or bolt that goes in there. Somehow and it comes out right about here. So got to figure out how to weave that through. Might have been another thing, had I thought more about it, I might have done some pre-alignment, but we'll see. I'm sure it will get through there. Just take some creativity. Well, I've got the 2 hard lines almost in place, but I wanted to comment on something that I didn't notice in the pictures, and it wasn't so clear, is that the pictures show the power steering pump and etc. removed, but obviously on my car I've still got them. So these 2 hoses run over the top of the adjusting bracket, and they aren't really that hard to place. I was thinking they needed to be routed through the bottom here, but they actually go up over the top. I also disconnected all the little brackets and things that were holding this harness on, and these different sensors. Another bracket here that had the hose, and to make it a little bit easier to get at. So here's the bottom of the hose where this inboard side comes to, and then this connects over to here. Oops, sorry, here and there. Well, mounted the intercooler. Actually, it went pretty easy. Bolts on to the two bolts here. So I loosened those, put the bracket on the intercooler. It slipped right up in there. I did have to bend the air conditioning. I don't know if you can see it. It's down below here, but it's in front of the power steering cooler. I had to bend the line there, and I did have to relocate the power steering line. There's a little bracket under there. I just flipped it upside down, and it lifted it up about 1 inch, which is plenty high enough. So this step was done. It wasn't too bad. All right, so I finally connected my hoses for the turbine outlet to the intercooler and the lower radiator hose. It's awfully tight in there. There's the radiator hose, runs down right next to the air conditioning pump, and the outlet hose runs under that to the turbo. And then on the other side was pretty straightforward. Just a couple different sections of pipe here. Comes from the intercooler. Here it has a little T. This is the blow-off valve. This is recirculating because it's the Voodoo kit. And then it hooks just right up here to the throttle body. Well, now I'm going to start on the adjustable timing wheel. It comes with the Voodoo package so that I can adjust the advance or retard on the ignition. Now, I have to remove the belts, so I start with the air conditioning and power steering belts on that side, and then I move over to the alternator belt on the other side, and then I have to take this pulley off and replace it with the wheel I got from Flyin Miata. So there's the stock, and there's what I'm going to put on. All right, that came off easily enough. I slipped on the new wheel, and it is a tight fit. And Flyin Miata recommends that you retard by 6 degrees, which is what I'm going to do. And I very carefully marked where I am just in case I ever have to open it up, and then I will know for sure where I originally set it. All right, I cut my radiator intake pan. Flyin Miata does a good job with the instructions, but it is a really difficult thing to explain in words in the pictures because it's black and they don't come out so well. So I wanted to show you what that looks like. So basically what you end up with is the air intake to direct the air into the radiator. And one thing is you got these two baffles or block things that block. And I accidentally cut this one off, and I glued it with JB Weld. And that doesn't look too bad. But here you can kind of see the panel that I cut off. So from this side, this would be the driver's side. And the passenger side. And it still bolts on. So on the passenger side, you have the two places where that bolts on, and you still have those two things on the driver's side. So now to reinstall, and I had to take the intercooler out. The instructions have you put the intercooler in before you do this, but to get this back in, you got to take the intercooler out. So I guess I'm getting good at that. Well, it might be a little bit of overkill, but I went in just to make sure I had clearances, and I had probably about 1/8 of an inch clearance between the baffle and the intercooler pipe. But I went in and trimmed just a little bit more off with my hacksaw, very carefully not to cut the silicone tube for the turbo, and I just put a little teeny tiny piece of hose in there too, just to give it a little bit extra buffer. So it's just always good to check the clearances. This is on the driver's side. On the passenger side, yeah, it's hard to see, but there are no clearance issues there. We're in good shape. All right, it's time to start wiring up the Voodoo box. And they give you these butt connectors, and you know, I've just never had any luck with these because I've used them, tried to use them on other things, and I just must not know how to do it right. I've already trashed 2 of these trying to get it to connect and or hook up, and every time I grip them, they don't stay tight. So obviously doing something wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to solder the connections anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off 3, and it's so tight working in there. I'm going to cut off 3 inches from the Voodoo harness, and then I'm going to sort of make little extensions. So I'm going to solder one end on to the connector where I cut the connector wire, and that's going to give me essentially a little bit extra wire to hook into the Voodoo. So essentially what I'll do is I'll have 2 solders on every connection, but I've got heat shrink tubing, so I'll heat shrink over it. It'll take a little bit longer, but I'll have more confidence in it. Well, I got it done. I did all the soldering, plugged it back in, 7 wires from the Voodoo into the engine ECU. I don't know if I showed this or not, but I did take out the seat, which was a grand idea. And I found a little way to lay down there and put my feet up here. It's my soldering iron and shrink wrap. So I wanted it to last. So soldering and heat wrap. Well, it's here. My 95-cent gasket that I trashed a few days ago came from Flyin Miata. That's the gasket between the turbo and the oil drain. And that has been one of my nemesis. There is the flange there. And I just didn't get it on straight. I didn't notice it till the next day, and I had used the gasket sealer, so I pretty much had to scrape it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a coat of the gasket sealer on that directly on the flange, and then I'm going to set the gasket on there, and I'm going to let it sit overnight. And then tomorrow I'm going to put another layer on the top of the gasket, and you know, then hopefully be able to reattach it. And that way I'm hoping that the gasket sealer holds it in place so there's no chance for it to move. Well, Flyin Miata sent me a new intake hose that has the bung in the correct place. The other one was right there. This one is here. I can feed the tube in, and I'm now installing the airbox. Now the airbox didn't quite line up either. The front hole, I thought maybe I had the wrong one. The front hole lines up, the back hole did not, but I just decided to drill another hole. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. The other thing that I spent quite a bit of time doing while I was waiting the day or 2 for this intake hose was to make sure I insulated everything. So you can see, like the brake hose, I put, you know, anything that rubs, I put a hose around. And I spent a little bit of time trying to bend some of these things down here to get a little more space for the water hose and the intercooler hose. So hopefully that'll all pay off. But things are looking up. Hopefully we'll finish today or tomorrow. There you go. Airbox, MAF sensor hooked up, plugged in. Got the blow-off valve connected. I don't really like the way that hose is. I'm going to put the radiator in and kind of see what it looks like. I did take the radiator out to make a little more room for me. I'm really glad I did that for a lot of reasons. But it's pretty easy to take in and out, so I will be going back in here in a second. But we're getting there. Here's a good reason why I'm glad I took the radiator out to do the work here. So I've got the radiator sitting in place. I haven't bolted it back in yet. But you can see that if I hook the hose up, this radiator hose, it might be a little bit kinked. So what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to leave it as it is here and maybe take a little bit off this end. I just kind of paranoid about things rubbing. So that's what I'm going to do. Here we go, trimmed, but you know what? It's still touching. Now maybe it won't touch as much, and maybe I can tilt this a little bit. I can't tilt it too much though because I have this AC line right over there. I suppose I could maybe bend it a little bit out of the way. So we'll work on that, do a little fine tuning, but I think that'll be good for now. I'm really eager to get the thing started, make sure that it runs, that it didn't create a brick here. Okay, on this bottom radiator hose, I'm not super comfortable with that kink right there. It's more than it looks like in the picture. And you can see how close I am to the air conditioning. It's very, very tight in here. So, and of course these hoses are touching too, which I don't care for. But right now the priority is going to be on getting the thing started and just making sure it's right. And then I'll do some cleanup at the end. All right, well, I got the oil primed in the turbo. You do that by taking out the EGI relay and cranking it for about 15 to 20 seconds at a time, then let it resting 30 seconds, and then doing it 15 to 20 seconds again, and so forth. It takes 4 or 5 times. It seems like forever, so I advise using a stopwatch. Now, I do have some cardboard underneath the car. Not that I'm expecting any leaks, but anyway, so I got some oil pressure, and I'm going to go ahead and put the relay back in. We'll go ahead and try to start it up. It's alive! It's alive! Yay, Dad! It's making a little extra noise because I didn't put the clamp on the muffler yet, just in case I have to take everything apart. I wanted it to be easier to do. It started right up. I thought you'd have a dance and a jig. All right, now we're in the fine-tuning mode. One thing I noticed, the hood wasn't closing quite right. There's just a teeny tiny bump. And so what I did was I came up with a little way of seeing where the problem was. So I took these square toothpicks and taped them to the side of the airbox and then gently closed the hood. And I can see actually that there's plenty of clearance around these sections, which means that there's probably going to be an air gap. But here, I think, is where you see the problem. Let's push this pin down. This pin was up as high as these, so that tells me that is going to need to be trimmed because it's about down as far as it can go. So one of the fine tunings here I got to do. Well, I did quite a bit of cajoling on the airbox. I was pretty sure it wasn't the right one, and I mean, I know it's hard to fit all these different shapes together, but Flyin Miata did a pretty good job. But I did have to cajole it. So see that notch right there? This, I had to cut that with a hacksaw. And then to get the air, and then to get the MAF to stick part way inside so that the air filter was lower, I actually had to get out, since I don't have a metal shop, I had to get out a file and actually elongate that hole to make it lower. And now it sits nice and low. I've got a little bit of trimming to do on that end, but other than that, I think I'm pretty happy with it. How exciting. Took the car off the jacks, let it run a few times, cool down, no leaks so far. I'm going to take it for her first little easy test drive. Well, I just got back from my first tuning drive, and I really didn't change anything. I'm going a little bit conservative. But the thing I got to tell you, this is a whole different car, man. This thing is fast. It's unbelievable. Well, I've got the heat shield there over the turbo. Got the stabilizer bar back on. So far, no leaks. Everything seems to be working pretty well. The one thing I'm doing, though, is waiting to the end here to get the splash panel, and you can see all those little scraps and things. I'm using my Dremel because it seems to be a little bit easier to do some of the complex trimming. But as you can see, I've got little pieces of splash panel everywhere. So it's definitely a tricky thing to get it to fit right. Well, here's finished product. Purrs like a kitten, goes like crazy.